The sky above the Northern Kingdom had never disobeyed Cale Thornwick before. For 3 centuries, he had commanded lightning to strike his enemies, summoned blizzards to protect his borders, and bent the very atmosphere to his will. The elements were his weapons, his servants, his proof that he was born to rule. So when he raised his hand during the coronation ceremony of his newest general and ordered the unseasonable storm to disperse, he expected immediate compliance. What he got instead was rebellion. The wind howled louder, swirling around the gathered crowd of alphas and betas with almost playful defiance. And then, unmistakably, carried on currents of air that wrapped around Cale like invisible fingers, came a whisper that made his blood run cold. Arya. The name repeated itself, soft as a lover's sigh, insistent as a heartbeat. Arya. 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 The storm had never spoken before. In all his long life, Cale had commanded natural forces, but they had never answered back with language, never defied him with such specific purpose. His second in command, Marcus, noticed the king's suddenly rigid posture and the way his silver eyes had gone wide with something that looked dangerously close to shock. The ceremony continued, but Cale heard none of it. His mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Someone had power over his power. Someone could override his elemental authority. And the elements themselves knew her name. That night, Cale stood, alone in his tower chamber, the highest point in the obsidian palace that had housed his family for millennia. He raised both hands and called forth his power, feeling it surge through his veins like molten lightning. Storm clouds gathered at his summons, obedient and swift. He shaped them, commanded them, and they obeyed perfectly, until he gave them a simple instruction to disperse. The wind picked up instead, rushing past his windows, and again came that whispered name, Arya. This time, he also felt something else, a directional pull, as if the wind itself was trying to guide him somewhere. Southeast, toward the coast, toward territories he had largely ignored because they held no strategic value and housed mostly omegas, lower-ranking wolves, and humans who served the kingdom in menial capacities. His pride wanted to ignore this challenge. His curiosity and his survival instincts would not allow it. If someone possessed power that could countermand his own, they represented either the greatest threat to his reign or the greatest asset. He needed to know which. Before dawn, Cale had assembled a small team. Not his full royal guard, which would draw too much attention, but Marcus and 3 of his most trusted warriors. He told them only that they were investigating a potential security threat. He told no one about the name the wind had spoken, or the humiliation of being disobeyed by his own element. The journey southeast took them through territories Cale had not personally visited in decades. His rule was maintained through representatives, taxes collected by administrators, justice dispensed through appointed judges. He saw the results of that distant governance in the wary eyes of villagers who scattered at the approach of his contingent, in the carefully neutral faces of local pack leaders who offered hospitality with the practiced ease of those who had learned to survive by not attracting attention. The prosperity he had always assumed existed throughout his kingdom looked considerably thinner out here, away from the wealthy northern cities. Fields showed signs of exhausted soil. Buildings needed repair. The people looked healthy enough but carried themselves with the quiet resignation of those who expected little and received less. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. They reached the coastal village of Tidecall on the 4th day. It was a small settlement, maybe 300 souls, built where the forest met the sea. Fishing boats bobbed in a natural harbor. Modest homes clustered around a central square where a market was in full swing despite the early hour. The scent of salt air mixed with pine and earth, and something else, something that made Cale's wolf stir with unexpected interest. Herbs, magic, ancient power so faint most would miss it entirely. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for anything unusual, and then he saw her. She was crouched beside an elderly woman's vegetable stall, examining a basket of greens with focused attention. Her hair was the color of storm clouds, that deep gray that comes before lightning, and it fell in wild waves down her back, bound loosely with a simple leather cord. She wore the practical clothing of a working Omega, sturdy pants and a tunic in shades of blue and gray, but there was something about the way she moved. A natural grace that had nothing to do with social rank and everything to do with someone completely comfortable in her own skin. When she stood, Cale felt the breath leave his lungs. She was not conventionally beautiful in the way of court Omegas, who painted and primped and displayed themselves like peacocks. Her beauty was elemental, raw, like the sea behind her or the wild forests that surrounded the village. High cheekbones, sun-touched skin, and eyes that, when they happened to glance in his direction, proved to be the exact color of the ocean during a storm. That deep green gray that held both danger and depth. The mate bond hit him like a physical blow. His wolf surged forward with recognition and possessive hunger. Mine. The word rang through his entire being with such intensity that he actually staggered, catching himself on his saddle. Marcus steadied him with a concerned hand. "You all right, my king?" Cale could not answer. He was too busy staring at the Omega who had just turned back to her conversation, completely unaware that she had just turned the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories into a mess of instinct and need. The bond was not subtle. It was a song in his blood, a magnetic pull that made him want to cross the distance between them and claim her immediately. But centuries of control, of never allowing emotion to override strategy, kept him still. He watched as she completed her purchase, accepting a bundle of herbs and roots with a warm smile that transformed her face into something luminous. She chatted easily with the vendor, her laughter carrying across the square, and Cale found himself cataloging every detail. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the small satchel she carried, worn but well-made, with symbols embroidered along the strap that made his historical knowledge tingle with half-remembered significance. The fact that people in the market gravitated toward her, asking quiet questions, receiving what looked like advice or comfort. She was valued here, respected, loved even, in the way small communities love their healers and wise women. As if, sensing his observation, she suddenly looked directly at him. Their eyes met across the crowded square, and Cale saw her freeze. The basket in her hands trembled. Her nostrils flared as she scented the air, and he knew the exact moment the bond registered for her too. Her eyes went wide, that stormy green filling with shock, then something that looked almost like recognition, and finally, unmistakably, rejection. She turned and walked away quickly, disappearing down a side street before he could react. Cale dismounted and followed, his team trailing behind in confused silence. The side street led to a small cottage at the edge of the village, positioned where the forest began. It was surrounded by gardens that even in late autumn showed signs of careful tending. Herbs hung drying under the eaves. Wind chimes made of shells and driftwood created a soft music in the breeze. He approached the door and knocked, perhaps more forcefully than necessary. The door opened, and she stood there, breathing hard, her hand white-knuckled on the doorframe. Her scent hit him fully now that they were close, and it was intoxicating. Rain and wild sage and something electric, like the air before a storm. "I know what you are," she said, her voice low and rough. "And I know what you want." The answer is no. Cale blinked, completely thrown off balance. Omegas did not refuse alphas, especially not their fated mates, and certainly not the Alpha King. "You do not even know what I am going to ask," he managed. "You are going to ask me to come with you," she said flatly. "To accept the bond, to be your mate and your queen and all the things that fate supposedly demands. The answer is no." She started to close the door. His hand shot out, holding it open with ease despite her effort. "You would reject the mate bond?" he asked, and he could not keep the genuine confusion from his voice. "You would reject your true mate?" Her laugh was bitter. "My true mate? You are Cale Thornwick, the storm tyrant, the king who uses the elements as weapons and treats power as a birthright. You have destroyed villages with your storms, killed thousands with your lightning, and ruled through fear for 300 years. She met his eyes with a fierce, unwavering stare. I know exactly who and what you are, and fate made a terrible mistake if it thinks we belong together." The words hit harder than any physical blow. No one had spoken to him like this in centuries. No one dared. And yet here was this slip of an Omega, calling him a tyrant to his face, rejecting him without hesitation. His pride roared for him to assert dominance, to make her submit, but something deeper, something he had not felt in a very long time, whispered that she was right to reject him, that perhaps he had become exactly what she accused him of being. "Your name is Arya," he said quietly. "The storms told me. I came here to find out why the wind speaks your name when it should obey my commands." Her face went pale. "What did you say?" "When I tried to command a storm to disperse, it ignored me. Instead, the wind whispered your name, over and over. Arya. It led me here, to you." He watched emotions flicker across her face too quickly to catalog. Fear, confusion, and then something that looked almost like grief. "You need to leave," she said. But her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by something shaky. "You need to leave right now and never come back." "Why? Because I am dangerous to you, or because you are dangerous to me?" "Both," she whispered. "Please, just go." A gust of wind suddenly whipped through the street, strong enough to rattle the wind chimes into a frantic song. Cale felt his power rise automatically to counter it, to assert control, but the wind paid him no attention at all. Instead, it wrapped around Arya like a protective embrace, lifting her hair, caressing her face. And he heard it again, that whisper. But this time it was not just her name. This time the wind carried words. "Protect her. She is the last. Protect her." Arya's eyes filled with tears. "Not now," she whispered to the air itself. "Please, grandmother, not now." "Grandmother." Kyle stepped back, his mind racing. The wind was not just speaking. It was being directed by someone, or something, with intention and intelligence. And Arya was communicating back. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What are you?" She wiped her eyes roughly, and seemed to come to some internal decision. Her shoulders straightened, and when she looked at him again, there was steel in her gaze. "Come inside," she said. "If the wind has already betrayed me, then you deserve to know the truth before you decide whether to kill me or try to use me." She turned and walked into the cottage, leaving the door open. Cale followed, gesturing for Marcus and his men to wait outside. The interior of the cottage was larger than it appeared from the street, with high ceilings and windows that let in abundant light. Every surface held plants, some growing in pots, others hanging in bundles, still others pressed between pages of the many books that lined crude shelves. The scent of herbs was overwhelming, but not unpleasant. It reminded him of the forests of his childhood, before power and responsibility had consumed everything else. Arya moved to a cabinet and retrieved a leather-bound journal, worn and ancient. She held it for a moment, as if gathering courage, then turned to face him. "My grandmother raised me," she began. "She told me stories about our family, about what we were before your ancestors hunted us to near extinction. At first I thought they were just stories, fairy tales to make a lonely child feel special. But then she started teaching me things. How to listen to the wind. How to ask the rain for help instead of commanding it. How to heal land that had been scarred by violence and greed." Cale felt a chill run down his spine. "Storm whisperers," he said quietly. "I thought they were legends." Arya's smile was sad. "That is what your family wanted everyone to believe, that we were myths, legends, safely distant in the past. The truth is that the storm whisperers were the original guardians of the elemental balance. We did not command the elements through force of will like your kind does. We communicated with them, asked for their cooperation, maintained the harmony between the natural world and the supernatural one." She opened the journal, revealing pages covered in elegant script and detailed drawings of symbols, weather patterns and what looked like family trees. 2,000 years ago, your ancestors made a choice. They discovered they could force the elements to obey through sheer alpha dominance, through imposing their will on the natural world. It was faster, more reliable in battle, more impressive as a display of power, but it came at a cost. The elements began to resist. Storms became more violent. Droughts lasted longer. The natural balance started to fracture. The storm whisperers tried to explain that force was not the answer, that cooperation and respect would yield better results. But your ancestors saw us as a threat to their power, so they systematically hunted us down and killed us. She traced a finger down a family tree that showed names crossed out, one after another, with dates and locations. My family line survived because we hid, scattered, changed our names, and pretended to be ordinary Omegas. My great-great-grandmother married into a coastal pack and never told her mate what she was. The knowledge, passed down through the female line, mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter, always in secret. She looked up at him, and he saw centuries of pain in her eyes. I am the last, Kale, the very last storm whisperer, and the elements know it. They are calling out to me, trying to wake the power in my blood, because the balance is breaking. Your way of commanding them through dominance is failing. The natural world is starting to rebel, and if it fully turns against the supernatural world, it will destroy everything. The weight of her words settled over him like a physical burden. He thought of the increasing severity of storms in recent years, the unpredictable weather patterns, the way his own power had felt strained lately, requiring more effort for the same results. He had attributed it to age, to the natural ebb and flow of magic. But what if it was something more? What if the elements were tired of being enslaved? If what you say is true, he said carefully, then why did the bond form between us? Why would fate tie you to the very bloodline that destroyed yours? She shook her head. I do not know. Maybe fate has a sense of irony. Maybe it is trying to tell us something about the need for balance, for old power, and new to find common ground. Or maybe, she added with a bitter edge, fate is just cruel. A sudden, urgent knocking interrupted them. Marcus's voice came through the door. My king, we have a problem. Kale opened the door to find his second looking, uncharacteristically shaken. The sky, Marcus said simply, pointing upward. Kyle stepped outside and looked up. The sky had turned a sickly green color, and the clouds were moving in patterns he had never seen before, swirling in multiple directions simultaneously, forming geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. The air felt wrong, charged with a kind of energy that made his teeth ache. This is not natural, Marcus said. This is not even supernatural. This is something else entirely. Arya appeared beside Kale, and he heard her sharp intake of breath. Oh no, she whispered. It is awake. What is awake? Kale demanded. She looked at him with fear in her eyes. The thing my grandmother warned me about. The reason she told me to never fully awaken my power. There is something old in the earth, something that predates both storm whisperers and alpha kings. It feeds on imbalance, on chaos, on the fracture between the natural and supernatural worlds. As long as the elements were content, whether through cooperation or domination, it slept. But now, with the balance breaking and my power awakening, it senses an opportunity. The wind picked up, and this time it carried no gentle whispers. It screamed, a sound like nothing Kyle had ever heard, full of rage and hunger and ancient malevolence. The villagers began to panic, running for their homes. The ocean behind them started to churn, waves rising to impossible heights. What do we do? Marcus shouted over the increasing roar of wind. Arya grabbed Kyle's arm, her touch sending a jolt through the mate bond that momentarily cleared his head. We have to work together, she said urgently. Your way or mine alone will not be enough. We need both, command and cooperation, force and harmony. It is the only way to push it back. You are asking me to trust you, Kyle said, to combine our powers when I do not even understand yours. I am asking you to choose, she countered. Your pride or your kingdom, your way of doing things or the survival of everyone you claim to protect. The green sky began to split, and through the cracks, Kale saw something that made his ancient blood run cold. Writhing darkness, alive and aware, reaching toward the world with tendrils of pure entropy. He had never been afraid of anything in his long life. He was afraid now. "Tell me what to do," he said, and the words came easier than he expected. Arya's eyes widened slightly, as if she had not truly believed he would agree. Then she nodded sharply. "Take my hands. Open yourself to the bond completely. No barriers, no control. Let me feel your power and you feel mine. Then we ask the elements for help together. Not command. Ask." Kyle hesitated only a moment before reaching out and taking her hands in his. Her skin was warm, calloused from work, and the moment their palms met, the mate bond surged to full life. It was overwhelming, a connection so deep and complete that he could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own, sense her fear and determination and the vast, sleeping power within her that was nothing like his own forceful dominance. Where his power was a storm to be unleashed, hers was an ocean of potential, deep and patient and infinitely adaptable. "Open to me," she whispered, and he felt her presence in his mind, gentle but insistent. He dropped every barrier he had ever constructed, every wall he had built around his emotions and his power, and let her in completely. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She gasped, and he knew she was experiencing the same overwhelming intimacy, feeling the weight of his centuries, the loneliness of his reign, the hunger he had never acknowledged for something beyond power and control. "Now," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We call to them together." She began to speak, words in a language he did not know but somehow understood, ancient syllables that resonated with power. He felt his own magic rise in response, not to dominate, but to harmonize. She was asking the wind for protection, the earth for strength, the water for cleansing, and the fire in the sky to burn away the corruption. And instead of commanding these things to happen, Kale found himself adding his voice to hers, his power to hers, not as a king to a subject, but as an equal to an equal, as a partner to a partner. The response was immediate and staggering. The elements answered not with the reluctant obedience he was used to, but with enthusiastic cooperation. The wind howled, but this time it formed a barrier around the village, keeping the writhing darkness at bay. The earth rumbled, and roots burst from the ground, creating a living wall of protection. The ocean rose, but instead of flooding the village, it created a dome of water overhead, shimmering with power. And lightning, his lightning, struck down from the clearing sky, not at his enemies, but at the cracks in reality, sealing them with bursts of pure elemental force. Together, channeling power through their joined hands and the mate bond that connected them, Kale and Arya pushed back against the ancient darkness. It fought, testing their defenses, seeking weaknesses, but every time it found a gap in his forceful power, her gentle strength filled it. Every time it tried to slip past her cooperative magic, his commanding will blocked it. They were balanced, perfect opposites creating something neither could achieve alone. Slowly, agonizingly, the cracks in the sky sealed. The writhing darkness retreated, pushed back into whatever deep place it had emerged from. The sickly green color faded, replaced by normal storm clouds that quickly dispersed under Arya's gentle encouragement and Kale's firm direction. When it was over, when the sky was clear and the elements had calmed, Kale and Arya collapsed to their knees, still holding hands, both shaking from the effort. The villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, staring in awe at the two figures kneeling in the square, surrounded by the fading glow of elemental magic. Marcus approached carefully. "My king? Are you injured?" Kale shook his head, unable to speak yet. He was looking at Arya, at this Omega who had stood beside him against an ancient evil, who had trusted him with her power and her truth despite every reason not to. She was looking back at him with the same wonder, the same dawning realization. "We did that," she said softly. Together, he agreed. He became aware that he was still holding her hands, and made no move to let go. The mate bond between them was no longer a pull of simple attraction, but a living connection, strengthened by what they had shared, by the blending of their powers, and the trust they had been forced to build in crisis. "I need to tell you something," Arya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When our powers merged, when you opened yourself completely to me, I felt your memories. Not all of them, but flashes. I saw your mother." Cale went very still. No one spoke of his mother. She had died when he was barely 20, centuries ago, and his father had forbidden her name from being mentioned. "What did you see?" "She had gray hair," Arya said, squeezing his hands gently. "Like mine, storm-colored. And in her chambers, she had books with the same symbols that are in my grandmother's journal. Kyle, your mother was a storm whisperer. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. That is impossible. My father would never have mated with an Omega of a hunted bloodline, unless he did not know," Arya said. "Unless she hid it, the way my family has hidden for generations. The storm whisperers were nearly extinct even then. Maybe she thought she was safe, that her secret had died with her people. But then you were born, and you showed such powerful elemental abilities that she knew the truth. You carry both bloodlines, Cale. The forceful dominance of the Alpha Kings, and the cooperative harmony of the Storm Whisperers. That is why you are so powerful. That is why the elements both obey and resist you." He pulled his hands free, standing abruptly and pacing away. His mind was reeling. If what she said was true, then everything he understood about himself, about his power, about his very identity, was built on incomplete information. His father had discovered the truth, he said slowly, the pieces falling into place. That is why she died. It was not an accident or an illness. He killed her. Arya stood, approaching him carefully. "Sorry, I should not have said anything." "No," Cale said, turning to face her. "You should have. I deserve to know the truth, no matter how painful." He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just his fated mate, but someone who carried the same stolen legacy he did, someone who understood what it meant to have power that came with a cost. "My whole life, I thought my strength came from my father's bloodline alone. I thought the Alpha Kings were supreme because we were simply superior. But it was never that simple, was it?" "Balance," Arya said softly. "It has always been about balance. Your father's bloodline gave you the force to command. Your mother's gave you the connection to hear the elements' response. You are what both our peoples could have been if they had chosen cooperation instead of conquest." He laughed, a rough sound without humor. "And instead, I became exactly what my father's line represented. A tyrant. A ruler through fear and force. You can choose differently," Arya said. "You have the power to be something new. Something better." Before he could respond, a shout came from the forest edge. One of his warriors, young and clearly panicked, burst into the square. "My king, we have incoming. A full battalion from the Western Territory. They are demanding to speak with you immediately. They say there have been elemental disturbances across the kingdom and they suspect sabotage." Kyle cursed. The Western Territory was ruled by Lord Draven, an old alpha who had always resented Cale's power and had been looking for an excuse to challenge his authority for decades. If Draven had felt the disturbances, if he thought Kyle was losing control of the elements, he would see it as an opportunity. "How many?" Kyle demanded. 200 warriors, the soldier reported. Heavy cavalry and battle mages. They will be here within the hour. Kyle's tactical mind immediately began calculating odds, defensive positions, strategic options. He had only 4 warriors with him. The villagers were mostly Omegas and humans, not fighters. He could potentially call in reinforcements from the northern garrisons, but they were days away. He was considering his options when Arya spoke. "Let me talk to them." Everyone turned to stare at her. She stood straighter, and despite her simple clothes and the dirt smudged on her face from their earlier battle, there was something undeniably regal in her bearing. If they are coming because they sense the disturbance, they need to understand what really happened. They need to know that the old ways are failing, and that there is another path forward. You are asking me to reveal your existence, Kale said. To tell the Western Territory. To tell everyone that storm whisperers still exist. That alone could start a war. We are already heading toward war, Arya countered, either from Dreven's ambition or from the elemental imbalance tearing the kingdom apart. At least this way, we can try to offer a solution instead of just reacting to the crisis. She was right, and he knew it. But the idea of putting her in danger, of making her a target for every power-hungry alpha and fearful traditionalist in the kingdom, made his protective instincts howl. The mate bond amplified everything, making the thought of her in danger almost physically painful. I will not let them hurt you, he said, and the words came out more possessive than he intended. I do not need your protection, she replied. But her tone was gentle. I need your partnership. There is a difference. Marcus cleared his throat. My king, we need to make a decision. Draven's forces will be here soon. Kyle looked at Arya, at this incredible Omega, who had already changed everything he thought he knew about power and leadership. Then he looked at his second in command, at the gathered villagers, at the clear sky above them that had so recently been torn by ancient evil. We meet them together, he said. We tell them the truth, all of it. The failing balance, the storm whisperers, the fact that the old ways of dominance are no longer enough, and we offer them a choice. Adapt or be swept away when the elements fully rebel. The hour passed in a flurry of preparation. Arya changed into a dress that had belonged to her grandmother, simple but elegant, in shades of gray and silver that made her storm-colored hair look almost luminous. She wore no jewelry except for a pendant on a leather cord, a silver disc carved with symbols that Kyle now recognized as storm whisperer signs for harmony and balance. Marcus arranged their small group in a defensive position at the village square, trying to look more impressive than their numbers warranted. The villagers, to their credit, did not flee. Instead, many of them armed themselves with whatever they could find and stood ready to defend their home and their healer. When Draven's battalion arrived, it was with all the pomp and intimidation the Western Lord could muster. 200 warriors in full armor, battle mages with staffs crackling with barely contained power, and war banners flying in formation. Draven himself rode at the front, a massive alpha with ice-blue eyes and a reputation for cruelty that rivaled Kale's own. He brought his forces to a halt just outside the village and dismounted with deliberate slowness, every movement calculated to display confidence and control. His eyes swept over the small defending force with obvious amusement before settling on Kale. My king, Draven said, and the title sounded more like an insult than a respectful address. How fortunate that we find you here in this remote village when your kingdom is experiencing unprecedented elemental chaos. I trust you have an explanation? Kale kept his expression neutral, refusing to be baited. I have more than an explanation, Lord Draven. I have a solution to a problem that predates both of our bloodlines. Draven's eyes narrowed. Then he noticed Arya standing beside Kyle, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. And who might this be? Your solution involves hiding behind an Omega. Kyle felt Arya's hand briefly touch his arm, a silent message to let her speak. She stepped forward, her chin raised, meeting Draven's contemptuous gaze without flinching. I am Arya Stormborn, last of the Storm Whisperer line. The power you felt disrupting the elemental balance was not sabotage or weakness. It was an ancient evil awakening, because the natural world is rebelling against centuries of forced dominance. The king and I fought it together, using both the old ways of cooperation and the new ways of command, and we pushed it back. But it will return unless we change how we interact with the elements. A murmur ran through Draven's forces. Several of the older warriors exchanged glances, and Kyle knew they were old enough to remember the stories, the legends of storm whisperers their grandfathers might have told. Draven's face had gone carefully. Blank. Storm whisperers are extinct, he said flatly, hunted to death centuries ago for their refusal to submit to proper alpha authority. Clearly I am not extinct. Arya replied calmly. And the reasons my people were hunted had nothing to do with refusal to submit, and everything to do with Alpha, fear of power they could not control or understand. Draven's hand moved to his sword. This is treason, he said, looking at Kale. You harbor a member of a forbidden bloodline. You consort with an Omega who practices outlawed magic. You have violated the most sacred laws of the Alpha Kings. Those laws were written by my ancestors to protect their monopoly on power, Kale said, his voice carrying across the square. Not to protect the kingdom or its people. I have recently learned that my own mother was a storm whisperer, murdered by my father when he discovered the truth, which means I carry both bloodlines, both types of power, and I will no longer pretend that dominance alone is sufficient to maintain the balance our world requires. The murmuring grew louder. Draven's warriors were talking among themselves, their formation becoming less rigid as confusion and debate spread through the ranks. Draven himself looked furious, his control over the situation slipping. You admit to being half Omega-blooded? He demanded. You expect the kingdom to follow a king with weak Storm Whisperer heritage? I expect the kingdom to follow a king who can actually protect them, Kale replied coldly. Can you claim the same, Draven? When the elements fully rebel, when the ancient evil returns stronger than before, will your pure-blooded dominance be enough to save your territory? Or will you watch your people die because your pride would not let you adapt? Before Draven could respond, the earth suddenly trembled. Not violently, but enough to make everyone stumble. The sky, which had been clear, darkened with unnatural speed. And then, from the forest in every direction, came movement. Animals. Thousands of them. Wolves, bears, deer, birds, creatures that should have been hibernating or hunting or scattered, all moving together toward the village in a massive convergence. They were not attacking. They were fleeing. And behind them, visible now as a darkness spreading through the trees, came the corruption again. It was not the massive tear in reality they had fought before, but something more insidious. Black tendrils spreading through the forest, touching trees that immediately withered and died, corrupting the earth itself. It is adapting, Arya said, her voice tight with tension. It knows we can fight it directly, so it is taking a different approach, poisoning the land itself. If it spreads to the ocean, to the rivers, it will contaminate the entire ecosystem. Draven stared at the approaching darkness, and for the first time, Kale saw genuine fear in the Western Lord's eyes. What is that? An enemy that does not care about your politics or your pride, Kale said. He turned to Arya. Can we stop it? Not with just the two of us, she replied. We barely managed before, and that was a direct confrontation. This is diffuse, spread out. We would need dozens of storm whisperers working in concert with alpha power to cleanse corruption on this scale. Then we improvise, Kale said. He raised his voice, addressing both his warriors and Draven's forces. Every alpha here has elemental abilities to some degree. Every beta with magical training can channel power. If you want to save your homes, your families, and your futures, you will follow my lead and the guidance of the Storm Whisperer. We will combine our powers the way the ancients should have done originally. Together. Not in dominance, but in cooperation. Draven stepped forward. You cannot seriously expect my forces to take orders from an Omega. Would you rather die pure than live adapted? Kale asked bluntly. Because those are your only options. The corruption is minutes away. Decide now. For a long, tense moment, Draven stared at the approaching darkness. Then he looked at his warriors, many of whom were already moving toward Kale and Arya. Fear overriding pride, the Western Lord's jaw clenched, and Kale could see the war between his ego and his survival instincts. Finally, roughly, Draven nodded. Tell us what to do. Arya immediately took charge, her voice clear and commanding in a way that had nothing to do with alpha dominance and everything to do with competence and confidence. She organized the warriors into groups based on their elemental affinities. Earthworkers to one side, air callers to another, water shapers and fire wielders in their respective positions. The battle mages formed an inner circle, ready to channel and amplify the power. She walked among them, explaining quickly how to shift their mindset from commanding to requesting, from forcing to cooperating. Some grasped it immediately, particularly the older wolves who had perhaps heard stories from their grandparents. Others struggled, their entire worldview built around dominance and control. Cale moved through the ranks as well, using his authority and his own example to encourage them. He showed them how he had opened himself to Arya, how he had let go of control and found something stronger in partnership. It went against every instinct his father had trained into him, but he did it anyway. And he saw the moment when others began to understand, when the corruption reached the edge of the village. They were as ready as they could be. Arya stood at the center, Cale beside her, their hands joined. Around them, over 200 warriors and mages formed a massive circle, their hands also joined, creating an unbroken chain of connection. "Now," Arya said, and her voice carried with power that had nothing to do with volume. "Ask the earth to reject the poison. Ask the water to wash it clean. Ask the air to blow it back. Ask the fire to burn away the corruption without harming the land. And mean it. Really ask, with respect and humility and hope." The combined power that rose from the assembled wolves was staggering. Cale felt it flowing through him, through Arya, through the mate bond, and out into the earth itself. It was messy and uncoordinated at first, some voices commanding, others pleading. But gradually, with Arya's gentle guidance and his forceful direction, it harmonized. The earth responded first. The ground beneath the corrupted areas began to glow with a soft golden light, and the black tendrils recoiled as if burned. The water in the nearby stream rose up in defiance of gravity, forming into tendrils of pure liquid that wrapped around the corruption and dissolved it like acid on rot. The wind picked up, but instead of the screaming chaos of before, it sang. An actual melody, hauntingly beautiful, as it pushed back against the spreading darkness. And the fire, oh, the fire, came not as destructive flames but as cleansing light, burning through corruption, without touching healthy wood or living creatures. The animals that had been fleeing stopped and turned, as if sensing the change. Birds began to circle overhead, adding their voices to the wind's song. The wolves among them howled, and Cale felt the howl resonate in his chest, felt it amplified by every alpha present until it became a declaration of defiance against the darkness. Together, united in purpose, if not yet in understanding, they pushed the corruption back. Inch by inch, foot by foot, driving it away from the village, away from the healthy forest, back toward whatever deep place it had emerged from. Arya's voice rose above the others, speaking in the ancient language of the Storm Whisperers. And Cale found himself translating somehow, his alpha power carrying her words to everyone present. She was not just asking the elements to help. She was thanking them, honoring them, promising to do better, to remember the old compact between the natural and supernatural worlds, to restore the balance that had been broken by centuries of dominance and disrespect. When it was finally over, when the last tendril of corruption had been burned away and the forest showed the first signs of healing, the assembled warriors collapsed, not from injury but from sheer exhaustion. They had poured everything they had into the effort, and it had been enough. Barely, but enough. Cale remained standing, though it cost him. He was aware that as king, as leader, he could not show weakness. But Arya, practical as always, simply sat down right where she was, pulling him down beside her. "They will respect you more for showing you are mortal," she said quietly, "for proving that even the mighty Alpha King has limits." He sat, too tired to argue, and found that she was right. The warriors around them, his and Draven's alike, looked at him not with the fear and distance he was used to, but with something warmer. Respect, yes, but also camaraderie. They had fought together, bled together in the metaphorical sense, and that created bonds that hierarchy could not. Draven approached slowly, The Western Lord looked as exhausted as Kale felt, his expensive armor dented and dirty, his carefully maintained image of untouchable power thoroughly shattered. He stood looking down at Kale and Arya for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "Both of you. I came here expecting to find weakness. Instead, I found strength I did not know was possible." Kale nodded, accepting the words if not fully trusting them yet. Dreven was a politician as much as a warrior, and this could be tactical positioning. But the Western Lord's next words surprised him. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," Dreven continued, his voice softer now, "about the storm whisperers. My grandfather forbade her from speaking of them, said they were dangerous lies, but she told me anyway, when he was not around. She said they were not weak. She said they were the strongest, because they had the courage to be gentle in a world that worshipped violence." He looked at Arya with something that might have been wonder. "I think she would have liked you." "Thank you," Arya said simply. "I think I would have liked her too." The tension broke. Other warriors began to approach, asking questions about the Storm Whisperer techniques, about how to better harmonize with the elements, about whether this meant the old laws would change. Kale let Arya handle most of the questions. She was better at this than he was, better at teaching and explaining without making it feel like a lecture or an order. He watched her interact with warriors who an hour ago would have sneered at the idea of learning from an Omega, saw her win them over with patience and genuine knowledge, and felt something shift in his chest. This was what a true leader looked like. Not someone who ruled through fear and power, but someone who led through wisdom and example. As the sun began to set, the village headman approached nervously and offered hospitality to the assembled forces. The villagers, braver now that the danger had passed, brought out food and drink. What should have been a tense military standoff turned into something closer to a celebration. Warriors from different territories mixed and talked, sharing stories of the battle, comparing experiences with the new way of channeling power. Kale found himself sitting by a fire with Draven, Marcus, and several other high-ranking alphas, watching. Arya across the square as she taught a group of young warriors how to listen for the wind's voice. "She is remarkable," Draven said, following Kale's gaze. "You are lucky fate chose her for you." "I am not sure luck had anything to do with it," Kale replied. "I think the elements chose very deliberately. They knew what I needed, what the kingdom needed, even if I was too blind and arrogant to see it." He paused, then added, "I have been a terrible king. A conqueror, not a protector. A tyrant, not a leader." That realization should have hurt more than it did, but there was a strange relief in finally admitting it. Marcus, loyal to a fault, started to protest, but Kale cut him off. "It is true, old friend. You know it is. How many villages have I destroyed with my storms because they dared to resist my rule? How many wolves have died because I saw dissent as treason rather than as a call for change?" Draven surprised him by responding thoughtfully. "We have all been terrible rulers, in our own ways. The system we inherited encourages it. Alpha dominance is held up as the highest virtue, and any show of gentleness or cooperation is seen as weakness. We have been trained since birth to value strength above all else, and we have confused cruelty with strength so thoroughly that we cannot tell the difference anymore. So we change the system," Kyle said. "We rewrite the laws. We bring back the Storm Whisperers, what is left of their knowledge and techniques, and we create a new way of leadership that balances force with wisdom." One of the other alphas, a younger lord from the Eastern Territory, spoke up. "The traditionalists will fight you on this. The old families, the ones who have held power for millennia, they will see it as a threat to everything they believe in." "Let them fight," Kale said flatly. "I have the elements on my side now. Truly on my side. Not just grudgingly obedient. I have the mate bond with the last Storm Whisperer. And if today is any indication, I will have the support of anyone with sense enough to see that the old ways are failing." He looked around the circle of alphas. "I am calling a grand council. Every territory, every major pack, all the old families and the new. We will present what happened here, demonstrate the new techniques, and we will offer a choice: adapt or be left behind. There will be chaos, Marcus warned. Possibly civil war if the traditionalists see this as a coup. Then we will weather the chaos together, Kale said. Because the alternative is elemental apocalypse, and I refuse to let that happen on my watch. The conversation continued late into the night, plans forming and reforming as different perspectives were added. Kale found himself listening more than commanding, valuing input rather than simply issuing orders. And it felt strange, but also right. As the fire burned low, Arya finally extracted herself from the crowd of warriors and came to sit beside Kale. She looked exhausted but happy, her storm-gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are planning a revolution," she said, though it was not a question. She had clearly been listening even while teaching. "Is that wise?" "Probably not," Kyle admitted. "But necessary. The kingdom cannot continue on its current path. We will tear ourselves apart, if the elements do not do it first." She leaned against his shoulder, a casual intimacy that sent warmth through the mate bond. "I am proud of you," she said softly. "You could have doubled down on the old ways, used, forced to maintain control, but instead you chose adaptation. That takes more courage than any battle." He put his arm around her, no longer caring who saw or what they thought. "I had a good teacher," she laughed quietly. "You had a stubborn Omega who refused to worship you just because fate said she should. There is a difference. Maybe they are the same thing," he replied. "Maybe I needed someone who saw me as I really am, not the image of the mighty Alpha King, and cared enough to push me to be better." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the warriors begin to settle for the night. Then Arya spoke again, her voice more serious. "You know this will not be easy," she said. "Even if we succeed in changing the laws and bringing back the Storm Whisperer techniques, it will take generations to undo the damage. The land is scarred, the elements are still angry, and that ancient evil is still out there, waiting for another opportunity." "I know," Kale said, "but we have time now. We have allies. We have you." She turned to look at him. "You keep saying we, as if you have already decided that I am staying, that I am accepting the mate bond despite everything your bloodline did to mine. Have you not decided that?" he asked, and he could not keep the vulnerability out of his voice. The idea of her rejecting him now, after everything they had shared, was almost unbearable. Arya was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. "I am terrified," she admitted. "Terrified of losing myself in this bond, of becoming just an extension of the Alpha King rather than my own person. Terrified that your people will never truly accept me, that I will always be the Omega who corrupted their pure-blooded king. Terrified that I will fail, that my knowledge will not be enough to restore the balance, and that I will be responsible for the destruction I was supposed to prevent. But," she continued, meeting his eyes steadily, "I am also hopeful that we can build something new together, hopeful that the mate bond does not have to mean domination, that it can mean true partnership, hopeful that maybe, just maybe, fate knew what it was doing when it tied us together." Kale caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I will never try to control you or diminish you," he promised. "I want a partner, not a subject, an equal, not a possession. We will make mistakes, we will argue, we will drive each other crazy, but we will do it together, as equals." She smiled, and it transformed her face into something radiant. "Then yes, Kale Thornwick, Storm Tyrant turned Storm Partner. I will accept the mate bond. I will stand beside you and try to save this broken kingdom. And if you ever revert to being a controlling tyrant, I will use every bit of my power to make your life extremely uncomfortable." He laughed, genuine and full, for the first time in longer than he could remember. I would expect nothing less. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. The mate bond flared to full life, no longer a pull of unfulfilled need, but a living connection of choice and commitment. Around them, he heard the elements respond, the wind singing softly, the fire crackling with warmth, the earth humming with contentment. Even in their damaged, angry state, the elements recognized and approved of this union. The next morning brought the practicalities of revolution. Draven and his forces formally pledged their support for the coming changes, though Cale knew it was as much tactical positioning as genuine conviction. The Western Lord was smart enough to see which way the wind was blowing, literally in this case, and wanted to be on the winning side. Messages were sent to all the territories, calling for the Grand Council to convene in 3 months' time. It would be held not in Cale's northern stronghold, but in neutral territory, a symbolic gesture to show this was not about one king imposing his will, but about all the territories coming together to find a new path forward. Arya began the work of compiling everything her grandmother had taught her, creating teaching materials for other wolves who wanted to learn the Storm Whisperer techniques. Several of Draven's mages volunteered to help, fascinated by the new old approach to elemental magic. The young warriors from the battle were especially eager, having felt firsthand the difference between forcing the elements and cooperating with them. Cale returned to his capital with Arya at his side, and the reaction was everything he had feared and expected. The old families were outraged. The traditionalist alphas called emergency meetings, drafted formal protests, and in some cases, openly declared their intention to refuse any Omega mate bond, regardless of fate. His own council was split, with half seeing the wisdom in adaptation, and half seeing it as weakness and betrayal of centuries of tradition. Through it all, Arya remained calm and steady. She met with the skeptics, demonstrated her abilities, and patiently explained the Storm Whisperer philosophy to anyone willing to listen. She won over the younger generation easily, especially the Omegas who had never had a voice in governance before, and now saw one of their own standing beside the Alpha King as a true partner. The older generation was harder, but even there cracks began to show. Cale made good on his promise to treat her as an equal. He gave her a seat on his council, made her voice heard in policy decisions, and publicly deferred to her expertise on all matters related to elemental balance and natural harmony. It caused scandals and outrage, but it also caused something else. Hope. For the first time in centuries, the kingdom's Omegas, Betas, and lower-ranking wolves began to believe that their voices might matter, that power did not have to flow only from dominance and fear. Change began to ripple outward from the capital. Some territories embraced the new techniques enthusiastically. Others resisted. A few declared open rebellion, refusing to attend the Grand Council, and threatening secession if Cale continued down this path. There were skirmishes along disputed borders, as ambitious alphas tried to take advantage of the perceived weakness in Kyle's rule. But through it all, the elements were changing. The storms were becoming less violent. The droughts were ending. The unnatural weather patterns that had plagued the kingdom for years were stabilizing. And in places where Storm Whisperer techniques were being practiced, the land was healing. Forests that had been dead for decades showed new growth. Rivers ran clearer. Even the animals seemed more peaceful, less prone to the strange, aggressive behaviors that had become common. The evidence was undeniable. The new way worked. 3 months passed in a blur of political maneuvering, teaching sessions, an increasingly comfortable partnership between Kyle and Arya. The mate bond deepened daily, no longer just a pull of attraction, but a profound connection that allowed them to work together with almost telepathic efficiency. They could sense each other's moods, anticipate each other's needs, and combine their powers with increasing skill and ease. When the Grand Council finally convened, it was the largest gathering of supernatural powers in living memory. Every major territory sent representatives. The old families came in force, clearly intending to vote down any proposed changes. But so did the younger alphas, the progressive thinkers, the wolves who had survived the battles against the ancient corruption, and knew firsthand that the old ways were failing. The council chambers were enormous, a circular amphitheater carved from living stone in the heart of the neutral territories. Cale stood at the center with Arya beside him, facing hundreds of eyes, some friendly, Most skeptical, a few openly hostile, he began by telling the truth. All of it. His mother's hidden heritage, the Storm Whisperer history, the ancient evil that had awakened because of the elemental imbalance, the battles they had fought and won by combining dominance with cooperation. He showed them through the chamber's magical projection system, using Arya's power to replay the memories of those who had been there, letting the council see for themselves what had happened. When he finished, the chamber erupted. Accusations flew. Some called him a traitor to his bloodline. Others called Arya a seductress who had corrupted the king. The traditionalists demanded he step down, claiming he was unfit to rule with Omega blood. But then Draven stood, and the chamber quieted. The Western Lord's voice carried weight, and he used it now to describe his own transformation, from skeptic to believer, from traditionalist to advocate for change. Other alphas who had been present at the battles stood as well, one by one, adding their testimonies, describing the power of working with the elements instead of against them. The tide began to turn, slowly but perceptibly. Then, one of the oldest alphas present, Lord Matthias of the Southern Highlands, rose to speak. He was ancient, over 400 years old, and commanded respect simply through his longevity and the wisdom it implied. "I remember the Storm Whisperers," he said, his voice thin but clear. "I was young when the last hunting parties went out. When the Alpha Kings decided that anyone who could challenge their elemental dominance had to be destroyed. I did not participate, but I did not protest either, and I have carried that shame for centuries." His eyes found Arya in the crowd. "If there is a chance to restore the balance, to make amends for the sins of our ancestors, then I say we take it. I vote for the reforms." Other old alphas shifted uncomfortably, but Matthias's support gave them permission to admit what some had perhaps been thinking. The Storm Whisperers had not deserved extinction. The Alpha Kings had acted out of fear and greed, not wisdom. And now the kingdom was paying the price. The voting took days. Every proposed reform was debated, amended, refined. But in the end, the council passed a new charter. Storm Whisperer knowledge would be preserved and taught. Omegas would have representation in government. Elemental power would be used cooperatively, not just dominantly. And most radically, the position of Alpha King would no longer be absolute. Kael would share power with a council of advisors that included Storm Whisperers, representatives from all ranks, and elected voices from the territories. It was not everything Arya had hoped for. It was not the complete dismantling of the hierarchy she sometimes dreamed of in her most idealistic moments. But it was progress. Real, substantial progress. And it was enough to build on. When Kael and Arya left the council chambers, they were greeted by crowds. Not all friendly, but enough to matter. Young Omegas waved Storm Whisperer symbols on banners. Pups who would grow up in a different world than their parents had known. Even some traditionalists who had voted against the reforms still offered grudging respect for the courage it took to risk everything for change. That night, Arya and Kael stood on a balcony overlooking the neutral territories, watching the celebration fires burn below. "How do you feel?" he asked, pulling her close. "Hopeful," she said. "Exhausted, terrified, but hopeful. We did it. Not completely, but enough to start." He kissed the top of her head. "I could not have done this without you. You know that, right? You gave me the courage to be more than what I was raised to be. We gave each other that gift," she corrected. "You showed me that strength and force are not inherently evil, that they can be used to protect and defend. I showed you that gentleness and cooperation are not weakness. Together, we are balanced." 6 months later, in the spring when the land was bursting with new growth, Kael and Arya were formally mated in a ceremony that blended Alpha traditions with Storm Whisperer rituals. Representatives from all the territories attended, and even the most traditional could not deny the beauty of seeing elements participate in the ceremony: wind carrying flower petals, rain blessing the union, earth providing a living altar of growing plants, and fire burning without consuming in symbolic torches. When they spoke their vows, promising partnership and equality, respect and balance. The very air seemed to shimmer with approval. The mate bond, already strong, became something transcendent, a connection that other wolves could actually sense as a presence, warm and powerful and right. The feast that followed lasted 3 days. Wolves from different territories mingled freely, grudges beginning to fade in the face of shared celebration. Storm Whisperer techniques were demonstrated and admired. And in quiet corners, conversations happened between alphas and omegas, between dominants and submissives, about new possibilities, new ways of being, new relationships built on choice and respect, rather than just instinct and hierarchy. The ancient evil did return, as Arya had predicted, but never again with the surprise and power of that first attack. As more wolves learned to work in harmony with the elements, as the land healed and the natural balance was restored, the corruption found fewer and fewer footholds. Each time it tried to emerge, it was met with coordinated resistance, Storm Whisperers and Alpha Kings working together to push it back. After several failed attempts, the attacks grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. Whether it had given up or was simply biding its time, no one knew, but the kingdom remained vigilant. Arya established a school for Storm Whisperers in the capital, open to any rank, any gender, anyone who showed the aptitude and the willingness to learn. The first class had 20 students. Within 5 years, it had 200. Within 10, every major territory had its own branch school. And the knowledge that had nearly been lost forever was spreading like wildfire. Kale transformed from tyrant to teacher, using his powerful combination of both bloodlines to demonstrate how force and cooperation could work together. He was not universally loved, too much history and too many sins for that, but he was respected. And more importantly, he was effective. Under his reformed rule, the kingdom prospered in ways it never had under pure dominance. The economy grew. The arts flourished. Innovation thrived in an environment where questioning authority was no longer treated as treason. Not everything was perfect. There were setbacks and challenges. Some territories never fully accepted the changes and maintained the old ways in their own lands, creating pockets of traditionalism that occasionally sparked conflict. A few assassination attempts were made on both Kale and Arya by extremists who saw them as destroyers of the proper order, and the work of healing centuries of environmental damage was slow and frustrating, with some lands so scarred that they might never fully recover. But the trajectory was clear. The kingdom was healing, the people were happier, and the elements, those ancient forces that had been enslaved and angry for so long, were becoming partners again, instead of weapons. 10 years after that first meeting in the village square, Arya gave birth to twin daughters. They came into the world during a gentle rainstorm that seemed to celebrate their arrival. And from their first breath, it was clear they carried both bloodlines in perfect balance. They could command and cooperate, force and harmonize, with an ease that even their parents envied. Watching his daughters grow, Kale often thought about the storm that had disobeyed him all those years ago, the wind that had whispered Arya's name instead of following his command. At the time, it had felt like the ultimate humiliation, proof that his power was failing. Now he understood it had been the greatest gift. The elements had known what he needed before he did. They had led him to the one person who could save him from himself, save the kingdom from its own destructive path, and restore the balance that should never have been broken. And if you have found inspiration in this story of transformation and balance, if you are curious about what happened to Draven and his journey toward redemption, or if you want to explore more tales of supernatural romance where power meets wisdom and love conquers not through dominance but through partnership, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling me which character resonated with you most, and share your thoughts on how we can all find balance in our own lives between strength and gentleness, between standing firm and staying flexible. More stories are coming, each one exploring different facets of love, power, and the courage it takes to change. Arya and Kyle ruled together for another century, long enough to see their vision fully take root, long enough to watch their daughters become leaders in their own right, carrying forward the work of balance and reform, long enough to see storm whisperers and alpha kings become not opposing forces, but complementary ones, two halves of a whole that was stronger together than either could be apart, when they finally stepped down, passing leadership to the next generation. They did so hand in hand, as they had done everything since that fateful day when the wind had whispered a name and changed the course of history. They retired to the cottage where they had first met, the small house by the sea that Arya had never truly left behind. There, in the place where it had all begun, they spent their remaining years teaching grandchildren, tending gardens, and watching storms roll in over the ocean, and sometimes, when the wind picked up, they would stand together on the shore and listen, not commanding the elements, not even asking for favors, but simply appreciating them. Partners, equals, balanced, the way it always should have been.